Hello and welcome to another free code session. My name is Jason Bach and I'm going to review some stuff that I've been working on off camera and just trying to clean up some minor bugs that were in Rocks, and they've been on the list for a while, and then I discovered some more things and I got rid of those as well. So it's fun to do all this while I'm doing a video, but there's times where I'm just like, I just want to code. I don't want to have a camera on me. I just want to get stuff down, be heads down, and knock this stuff out. And so I'm going to do a 7.1.2 release later today. Just recording this video while I have some time over lunch. And I'll have this out later today, which is July 25th. So that's when the next minor version is going to come out. And I'm going to go through these bugs in a little bit and just kind of talk about real quick what I found out with them and what I had to do. I also have another VS Live coming up in San Diego, and I definitely need to be focusing on that for the next 2 weeks, because one of the speakers that I do this workshop with, it's with Rocky and Alan, two guys that I know. Alan can't make it this time, so Rocky and I have to pick up the slack, and I have to make sure that I can cover the sections where Alan won't be there. So there's going to be some prep work involved in that, and so I really need to make sure I've got that down, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on for the next 2 weeks. I also have a conference in late August when I'm on vacation down in Wisconsin. It's mostly just a time to go see family and friends and have a couple days away from the kids. I will be speaking at a conference where I'm doing a new talk that I hopefully will continue in the future and do more of. That's the one thing about talks is if you're going to put together a talk for a conference, make sure it's one that you think you could do at multiple conferences, because the payoff is so much better. So anyway, got that to do as well. And then I got some time between August, 3 months before VS Live Orlando, and I'm doing a couple of talks that I haven't done in a while. I think one of them's a new one. So there's definitely going to be some prep work there, but at least I get a buffer of time. So in any event, I'm going to talk about these fixes, and then I'm going to talk about an idea that I might do in the next major version of Rocks. So I'll cover that one at the end of the video. May not do it, but we'll see. Okay, this one was pretty easy. When I was doing explicit property implementations, for some reason on the setter, I wasn't using the fully qualified name. You're going to hear that a couple times. I still find cases where I have not done this, and then they pop up, and I'm like, oh, yes, I didn't do that. So this one was a pretty simple fix. Just needed to make sure I had the right fully qualified name there. Duplicate members and shims. Some of these get really esoteric, and I think this is one of them where it's like, why would you ever run into this case? But you do. And of course, the whole thing about shims is that's basically a mechanism I have in place in Rocks so that you can end up calling default interface members on interfaces. So the point of this is that what did I have to end up doing is, I was not looking at whether something should be explicitly implemented or not. And so I was getting multiple implementations in these shim types that I make. And so I had to just basically check for that. And then once I put that check in place, this was done. This one was really interesting. If you look at the code here, you'll see that you end up with duplicate members if T is object type. And I wasn't catching that. And in fact, I think this led to an issue that I actually put on Visual Studio or Roslyn. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, so no, this is actually a different one, but there's definitely cases where Visual Studio's generate overrides won't do the right thing. This is one where you have a static new string, but that's not the same case. But I think this one might lead to a similar issue in that it will also generate two. There's some cases where it does it right, and some cases it doesn't. But in any event, I had to check to make sure that if T was an object, and that led to the same method, that I basically just create one, because then that satisfies both conditions. This is one that I've already solved before, but I forgot one case, which is if you have a generic type and that is constrained to a type that is protected, I can't actually mock this at all. So then if it's abstract, I can't mock it. If it's virtual, then I just can't provide it as something that you can mock. So I just had to also check the type parameters. In fact, hold on, let me get Visual Studio up so I can show you in some of the places in code where I'm doing this. Okay, so that's what I needed to add, is something like this, where I'm looking through all the type parameters, and then I added a type parameter symbol extension, and that just looks to see that if you have any constraints where you have the constraint being a class or an interface, then can that type be seen by the containing assembly? So then that solved that issue. Here's another one that was pretty simple. This one doesn't have a fully qualified name emitted for types when events are involved. So pretty simple, just needed to find a place to do the fully qualified name. Yes, this is the one that I just mentioned that is causing Visual Studio problems because, well, sort of. It's not the static one, but okay, so this isn't the right one. I've confused myself. I've fixed like 10 or 15 bugs, and a lot of them were very similar. This is one where the subclass has a new, which is hiding the virtual, and basically in that case, you can't mock it. So you can't override it. And that's similar to the thing that I just showed you in Visual Studio with the generate override. So again, this one can't be, and so you basically have to just not provide that as an option. Obsolete attribute, what? Yeah, let me see if I can find where I do this. Yeah, so in this mock model class, I wasn't actually checking the members themselves to see if they're obsolete. I was looking like at the constructor parameters or the method parameters and so on, but I wasn't doing this check. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, I don't know if it really matters if the member is obsolete or the member uses obsoletes. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, it's not a bug, because if the first one is, you at least are creating a diagnostic that will stop the mock from being made. If the second one is, then you use those. It's possible that both of them are there. And so really what it should be are ifs. So I'm going to make a note of that and just say, for the obsolete checks, do them on the members and their parts as well. But either way, this one solved that issue because now we're actually looking at the members attributes as well. This one shows that when you make assumptions, what happens? I always thought, I was under the impression that an event has to be defined with arguments that are derived from event args, and that's incorrect. I don't know where I came up with that, but for some reason I always thought that that was the case. And that's not true. There was a case in, where was it? Stack Exchange Redis, where you could have event args come through. It was called server maintenance event that didn't derive from event args, and that's perfectly fine. So I just had to change the code that was restricting a type from being event args to just object, and then this worked. This one was a little disappointing because I had an idea about potentially handling, or more to the point, getting rid of some code generation. And I still may do it, but the simpler fix was just to put a where T is unmanaged when I'm generating code. For example, yeah, so here is where I put in the where is unmanaged. And so that basically fixes it. What I was hoping to do, and I actually had spec'd this out, the issue has a link to something I was like, I think I could do this, and it actually proven out through writing some code, which is nice about source generators. I could just grab the code that was source gen and then make corrections in it and try it somewhere else, I think in like the CodeGen app that I use for testing, and showed that, yeah, it actually does work. And so the problem is that if you're using a delegate pointer or a function pointer, more of the point, no pun intended, it doesn't work because you can't have delegate star with generics int and void. It's a really weird syntax that is a pointer, but you can't use it like you could if you said T, where T is unmanaged. And then you can actually have T pointer in your code. So I still may do this. I'm not completely throwing it out because, in fact, I'm going to make a note to make sure it's still on the list, because if there are pointers, they're probably just your typical pointers. And there's also potentially some gain where I might be able to have a type that uses span of T because I still, or ref-like types, because I still generate code for those. And I may be able to get past that with doing some special derive, like one for span of T, one for read-only span, and one for memory, potentially. That also, though, had a trickle effect because there's some other types that are generated that then use those. And I think that's also where the problem got squirrely as well, that I was like, that's not the greatest. And I already have a solution in place. So it may be something I still do in the future, but for right now, that fixed the problem. Speaking of which, this is the one. And so I'm going to make a note to unclose this and maybe do this in a future version. But this describes what I wanted to do, where you have a pointer argument deriving from argument where T is unmanaged, and then you can actually use pointers. All this code shows where you could do this. And so then that gets rid of some generated code. But yeah, there was a couple things I didn't actually keep in mind. And I would have to, it isn't worth the work. I should say it's not worth the work now. So yeah, and what I have, it works. So I did what I needed to do to fix it for now. But I may come back to this as a, you try it, doesn't work, but that doesn't mean it's a wrong or bad idea. Maybe come back to it and revisit it later. Nullable return issue in shims. This one, all I did is I put the null forgiving operator, or what's called the dammit operator. And I just put that in places where I was returning stuff, even if it didn't need it, because the compiler doesn't care if you put it in there or not. And I just decided to go, for simplicity's sake, just put it in there, and then it makes the error go away. So it worked. Oh, this was a fun one. This was really fun. And again, this is getting to that exact match thing where you end up in a situation where you're like, what do you do? So if you look at this, you have an interface that constrains this to this type, which has a method here, but then something that implements this interface also puts in a protected abstract member, okay, where there's two, and one of them is T-type, which is still in this type, okay? But what happens if you create a version of this that is of this type node? Well, what you end up with is a case where both of these are exactly the same. Okay, so that happens, and what becomes really problematic is if you try to just do one, it doesn't work. Because I think it's considering this one not to be overridable. And then you put this one in, and you still, because it's abstract, you have to provide an implementation. So this one I actually had to get to the point where if I detect this, where you have a non-virtual member like this, then what you need to do is, actually, I'm sorry, this one comes from here. And so you have to implement it. And so what I got to do is say, if there's a match to a non-virtual and this is abstract, then I have to say that that is no longer a type we can mock, because we just can't. So I had to put the code in there to detect that, and then also flag it as non-mockable. So yeah, that was fun, because just the problem itself, if you try to define something like this, you can run into a case where you can create a valid type definition, but that you can't actually implement. So, you could argue that maybe type node, like saying it has to derive from type node. But it can't be type node. It has to derive from it, but it can't be that. That's maybe a case where you want an analyzer to say, don't put this in here because then otherwise you would, and you can't have the compiler do it because it doesn't, you don't necessarily run into a case where you would do something like this. So yeah, this is a fun one. This was an interesting one. This was found on ILGPU type converter. And then to end on a simple note, again, a case where I didn't have a fully qualified name with a property, I believe, something that was a property within a value task of T. So again, just had to change that to make it fully qualified name. So again, those are the ones I found, and I will be packaging that all up with 712. I'm also considering, if you look at my notes, there's a whole bunch of other not types, but packages that I found that I'm going to consider just adding. And then if I find bugs, I'll put in another list of bugs to fix. We'll see. I'm going to see how this goes. But I want to put those in there and just see, does anything else pop up? I'm already thinking about the next major release. And when I did 7, it was because there were some major changes coming to C#, some of which did actually influence the language. Required was one of them because it actually forced me to have a mechanism in place to allow you to set required and init properties, even if they weren't mockable, because you had to set them. Required needed to be set on the constructor or object initializer. But the point is, I had to put a mechanism in place to do that. I've been looking at C# 12, nothing in it right now. I know there's this thing with interceptors. I think roles and extensions or something like that. Both of them are being considered preview features, so not supported, don't rely upon them. And so I'm kind of like, I'm just looking at them and watching their evolution, but until they actually show up, they may have some impact. I don't know yet, but that's something I'm watching. The other features, not really. I don't see them having an impact on either how ROX works, or like raw string literals makes testing and code generation a lot easier because you have these long pieces of code as a string and it just formats so much nicer. So there is one thing though that I'm considering that would be a breaking change, and let me bring that up. What I thought is I create all these static classes with extension methods to allow you to do expectation setups on a mock. And then I was thinking, wait a minute, you could have this, like, is roles and extensions something that could be used here where I could actually project like the mock interface, except not the interface itself or the mock type, onto the expectations type. And then I went, wait a minute, I'm already generating code. Why can't I create a custom type a custom expectations type that has all those expectations on it? So right now, here's an interface. This is the code that gets generated. You see, you have to basically, I think, yeah, this is not there. Sorry, methods. Yeah, the scroll bar is too far down. But you get dot methods, and then you are able to go into that and get the expectations on there, and then you can get the instance, and here's the mock type itself. That wouldn't change. The mock code generation wouldn't change, but then all of this wouldn't necessarily go away. It would just be shoved onto a new type. And so what you do right now is this, which arguably I still like because it's readable. It's like I have expectations, I'm looking at the methods, no parameters. Okay. Same thing with properties. It does get a little wordy, but okay, whatever. Here's the thought, is to have something here that returns a custom expectation type, and that expectation type has no parameters, one parameter. It has get data that would have what I call adornments that you set, where if it was a getter, it'd have return. If it was a setter, you could say whatever the set is, and so on, or an init. And then you still do your stuff as normal. And the thing that would be interesting about this from my perspective is I think it's a little bit neater. The expectation call comes up here, but then after that, it feels like I'm saying I have expectations that no parameter is called. I have expectations that one parameter with a 12 is called. I don't need these constant method or property getter things in there. I think what I could do is generate something like this. Here's something that derives from expectations. This is also going to derive from my disposable because There's another feature that I had in place where I'm thinking if I made the expectations, this probably should be sealed, but whatever, where I made the expectations disposable, then it forces you to put a using in there, assuming you're using any kind of static analysis. But that would be cool because it would catch that. And then the dispose just would call verify, as you see down here. Now you can see that we have on this, you can't create it. It's got to come through something like this. Yeah, things that could be colliding with names that exist on the stuff that I want to mock, I have to make as static methods. If static abstract members were ever supported in rocks, and they can't be, there's reasons you can look in rocks to find out that it's not allowed. Not because I don't want to do it in rocks, but it's because of the fact that you can't pass in an interface to a generic type where that interface has static abstract members. That's just a C# thing. So, and also this, I might want to do something like this instead of instance, because there might be something on my test interface that's called instance that return, and whether it returns that or not, you'd end up having a collision. So I'm like, maybe, maybe not. So we'll see. But then here's the mock that still exists. But then I put here those static extension methods. I just make them as members on this type. And they actually set up all the expectations and the adornments and whatnot. So it's just getting rid of a layer and putting it right here. And I think like I have what I like about this. And this won't help though. I already realized that won't help because this type doesn't derive from this. It derives from expectations. So that's not going to clear that up. So I talk about the properties and setters. And then if explicit interface implementation is needed, that's another case where I may need to do something where I generate some stuff like I'm doing before and saying these are the things that are generated. And then I generate a property like this, or I may, if I'm worried about naming conflict, I would make I am explicit. Instead of it being a property on there, I would say, I am explicit dot explicit call. And so that would basically be something to say, here's the explicit implementation. Again, these are just notes. I don't know if I'm going to do this. So unfortunately, by the time this video gets published, I may already be down the road of doing an 8. So I may start pushing this in places just to go, what would people think about this? And I've asked one person, but the unfortunate thing about this library is that not a lot of people use it at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure very, 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 very few people use it at all. But, and in a way that helps because this allows me to continue to use it as kind of a playground. And I'm like, hey, if I think this is a good idea, I'm just going to do it. And if it wouldn't break somebody. If it would, this would be a major release, which with Semver would mean I could do breaking changes. So yeah, I'm thinking about this. I kind of like a lot of aspects about this. I do see where this might be a little bit, I don't want to say magical, but maybe not as well understood as if you see something like this, how does that read? But I don't know. There's something that I find about this that is appealing. And I also think it takes away some of the generated code and some of these layers of indirection and puts it directly on one type. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. So just something I'm experimenting with. I don't know what I'm going to be recording next. Again, I have to shift my focuses to be on other things right now, but hopefully in a couple of weeks, I'll be able to start looking at either things in rocks or the myriad of other things that are out there in software development land to play with and see how they work. Thank you all for watching. Leave comments and questions below. See you in the next episode.